Commander is a format full of incredibly powerful cards. Objectively, some of the strongest cards ever printed will randomly show up in your Commander pods. And a lot of players assume that dropping tons of cash on these powerful cards will make your deck much stronger, and the wins will come easily. And yet, if you look anywhere on Commander YouTube, you will find tons of creators who make budget decks. And, at least anecdotally, my viewers have told me that many of the budget decks I built work well. And I'm going to assume that that's the case for many of these other budget decks out there. Because if these decks didn't work well, I assume that budget content wouldn't be that popular on YouTube. So how is it that these budget decks are able to function well enough in EDH without having these expensive, individually powerful cards in them? I think there are three main factors that contribute to this. So, if you would join me in this shower thought turned rant that I mashed into a video essay, I will explore the impact of individually powerful cards and their limitations. But first, I gotta tell you about this video's sponsor, Cool Stuff Inc. If you use my code TTM at checkout, you can get 5% off your order, and it supports the channel. So if you're buying expensive staples or a budget deck, check it out. The discount might make it worth buying from Cool Stuff Inc. Also, they have a new selling service where you can sell bulk cards in. Check that out as well. Okay, so there are some easy examples of powerful cards that don't actually improve your deck, and this is my first main point. There are a lot of powerful cards that go in a lot of decks that can't be added to your list in isolation. Lion's Eye Diamond, for example. This is a powerful card, enabling some of the most busted combos in the game. Objectively, this card is strong. I mean, it's Black Lotus with a downside, but like tacking a downside onto arguably the strongest card ever made is still pretty good. Lion's Eye Diamond is a CEDH staple and an important card in many decks. Yet I would almost never ever recommend a player add Lion's Eye Diamond to a random deck. Not for power level reasons, but because this is a combo piece. You can't just add it to a deck randomly. Same can be said for a lot of other cards that require building around them. Ad Nauseam, for the most part, requires a low mana curve to make it useful, or a deck that cares about losing life. Thassa's Oracle is not very strong without the Forbidden Tutors. You can't just put this in a random blue mid-range deck, it's not going to do anything. But many players probably already knew that. Lion's Eye Diamond is a cop-out answer to powerful cards not making your deck powerful. I assume that many players who clicked on this video are thinking about Cyclonic Rift, Demonic Tutor, Great Henge. These expensive powerhouses that seem to be good regardless of what deck they're in. Now, to be clear, there's no twist here. Although I'm often a contrarian, I'm not going to say, Cyclonic Rift is actually bad, you shouldn't play it. Cyclonic Rift is a powerful card. All of these cards that I mentioned here, and many more examples that I'll have, are good and will do things that are useful for your deck. Basically, every Commander deck is going to want some amount of ramp card draw and removal. You're not getting around that. Many of these staple cards will do that individual thing exceptionally well. But cards don't exist alone. They're in a deck with 99 other cards. Your deck can't just be ramp card draw and removal. That's the glue that holds your game plan together, but you still have to have a functioning deck without those. And one of the things that these generically powerful cards usually don't do is synergize with whatever your theme is. Not always, of course. If you're in a treasure deck, Smothering Tide will give you synergy. It makes a lot of treasures. But something like Cyclonic Rift is not usually a synergy piece in your deck. It's just a board wipe. And this is something that budget deck builders know well. Which brings me to my second point. Budget decks leverage synergy much better than a lot of other lists do. Cyclonic Rift is a powerful board wipe, but in a +1/+1 counter deck, Wave Goodbye can do a pretty good impression for a fraction of the monetary cost and even less mana. In fact, if you are a +1/+1 counter deck and you want to wipe the board and attack with creatures, you might not care as much about Cyclonic Rift's instant speed because you want to clear the board and swing out. Although Rift can still do this, waiting on an end step, spending the 7 mana, it might be easier to fit a 4 mana Wave Goodbye into the deck. And we can do this with many other cards. The One Ring is a comically busted magic card, especially if you have synergies with it, but in the right deck, a Beast Whisperer can easily draw you more cards and much faster. If I'm in an Elf Ball deck, I would sooner add Beast Whisperer than I would the One Ring. But it's not just about synergy. There is a bigger reason why budget decks work so well. When you work on a budget, you need to be more careful about each card choice. If you're going to spend $5 on a Wave Goodbye, it needs to be worth $5. A lot of decks I come across will have strange card choices where many of the cards don't seem to fit with the main theme of the deck. And it's not even just expensive cards, it's just adding the powerful things. Dark Ritual is one of the most common examples of this. I do a lot of deck reviews for my patrons. Plug, link in the description. Ooh, you can still get in for December. But a common card that I recommend cutting is Dark Ritual. Dark Ritual is a very powerful card, especially if you want to jam your commander out as quickly as you can, which many decks do. But a lot of black decks that play the card don't. If your commander is more of a synergy piece or finisher, I don't know how good Dark Ritual is. If your deck is a slower mid-range deck, I almost always think that a mana rock that will consistently give you more mana is going to be better than a Dark Ritual. But in budget decks, I don't see nearly as many of these off-theme cards or cards that don't quite fit the curve as well. And this brings me to my final point. A powerful deck is not determined by budget or individual cards, but by how strong the core game plan is, and how well your deck can execute that game plan. Evaluating the strength of your core game plan and determining how strong your deck is overall will probably be its own video. Here I just want to talk about looking at what that means. So for example, one of the budget decks I made for my $25 deck building challenge was Tibor and Lumia. What is the core game plan here? You find a way to give the commander Death Touch. Then any blue and red spell becomes a board wipe, because you can stack the triggers how you want, give the commander flying, deal the damage to everything. Essentially, it's build your own 2-mana instant speed board wipe. And that, as a core game plan, is quite powerful. And by filling this deck with flying creatures, these board wipes are one-sided. So the core plan here is quite good. Attack with flyers while keeping the board clear. This is a strong game plan. One-sided board wipes are really good. And the whole list is in service of this. With a bigger budget, I wouldn't be cutting my budget counter spells and card draw. A lot of them are here because the list wants blue and red spells. I could replace Izzet Charm with Mana Drain, but how often do I need that excess mana at sorcery speed, and how often would I rather have an instant speed board wipe? Adding a random One Ring may draw me more cards, and I could make use of the protection, but it's not an instant speed board wipe tacked onto card draw. And any of the other budget deck lists in this video will do something similar. If you haven't watched the video, check it out. It's really good. I'm very happy with how it turned out. These decks all have a powerful core game plan, and each card has been carefully selected to service that plan. Understanding your deck's main way to win and finding out how to improve your ability to get to that winning state is the key to making your deck more powerful. The first step to this is laying out your game plan. I would recommend doing this with like a flowchart. Your flowchart might want to be a little bit more in-depth than this one. What's your card draw in the mid-game? What's your removal package? What do you do if something goes wrong? Do you have a backup win con? Your core game plan is really important and a very overlooked part of your deck. It's often neglected. Honestly, it could be its own video. And guess what? It already is. My buddy Rebel made a really great video on EDH game plans that's worth a watch. I'll throw a link in the description so you can check it out. But I wanted to focus on that in-between, the cards that get you to your end point, the winning state. If you pulled up your deck list right now, could you tell me the purpose of every card? And is it the best one for that role? I think this might be best shown with a few examples. In my Heliod Draw-Go control deck, I am not playing Swords to Plowshares or Path to Exile. Initially, these cards might seem like auto-includes. Generically powerful removal in a control deck? I mean, sign me up, right? But as I played the deck and looked at the deck more and more, I ended up cutting them for 2 more board wipes. Because this deck's core game plan does not involve having creatures on board. It's really a token enchantment deck. So why cast spot removal that's a 1-for-1 hitting 1 creature when I might as well just nuke the whole board, since I'm not really losing any real cards. My tokens are very replaceable. Here's another example. I was reviewing a patron's Cathril deck, and when I was looking at their list, I thought maybe they could play another board wipe. Now, I could have suggested a generically powerful card like Farewell, but honestly, I don't think Farewell is very good here. Exiling the Yard is not great for the commander, and neither is exiling all of your creatures. So instead, I suggested Cataclysmic Gearhulk. Not only is this a powerful wrath that can affect many card types similar to Farewell, but it's also a creature with a keyword, giving it synergy with the core game plan of the deck. For my final example, I want to talk about my Tawanos deck. I used to run Force of Will in the list, and I ended up cutting it for Confirm Suspicions, which is a very slow 5-mana counterspell that makes 3 clues. This initially might seem like a serious downgrade, but it actually works so much better in the deck. For one, the deck list has a lot of artifacts, and there would be multiple times in a game where I just ended up wanting to hardcast Force of Will because I didn't have a blue card in hand to discard. Also, the deck is mostly cards that cost 3 mana or less, so my hand empties pretty quickly, meaning those few blue permanent cards that I have end up getting played early game and they don't sit in my hand to get discarded. Additionally, the deck operates at instant speed with a lot of activated abilities and plays a lot of cheap baubles. So holding up 5 mana is really not very hard to do, and those clues are really great when comboed with synergy cards in the deck. They represent not just extra card draw, but mana or damage. Many of these staple cards are expensive because they will almost never be a bad choice. In most decks, you can run any of the cards I have talked about here, and it will be somewhat successful. With this video, I'm not saying to never run generically powerful cards. I play Farewell in certain decks, and I play Cyclonic Rift in certain decks. I just think it's important to keep in mind that they're not always the best option for your deck. And if you instead play a more synergistic option, you might end up getting more value than one of these expensive staples. Of course, there is a balance here. You don't want all of your cards to require synergy to work. If somehow you concoct a deck that only operates when you have your commander in play, including your removal and card draw, then maybe it's going to be a rough game for you when your deck's game plan gets a little disrupted. So that's why powerful cards don't inherently make your deck powerful. It really has to do with your core game plan, and that's why budget decks function so well. They focus so much harder on the core game plan and have trimmed away all of the fat such that they can execute on that powerful game plan more consistently. Of course, this is all my opinion. I want to hear from you. Do you have an example of a time you cut a generically strong card for something that was a perfect fit in your list? Are you going to review your deck's game plan and card choices now? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you very much for watching. And special thanks to my tier 3 patrons, who get extra perks like being in the credits here. If you want to support me, liking and subscribing is a great way to do so. But if you want to support me further than that, the Patreon is a great way to do so.